We're going to call the Public Safety Committee to order. This is our final one after our second day, and our final one today with Senator Hicks. I'll just, anybody that's testifying today, what I request of you when you're recognized by Senator Hicks to come up to this podium right here, and so everybody can see you and we kind of distinguish you from the rest of the crowd, if you would. Secondly, we will not ask any questions until the conclusion of all folks that are testifying. It's been my experience that if you have a question, oftentimes it's answered by somebody else that presents, and if you get bogged down in questions, and people at the end of the presentations are kind of forced with time or whatever. And at the conclusion, we'll run any questions from the chair, and then at that point, if you've testified and somebody wants to ask you specifically a question, you can do that from your seat. The red button on the right, activate that. I will warn you though, if that red button's on, even though you may not be talking, the world may be watching you. So be sure to turn your red button off when you're not talking, and it's caught us all at some point. So at this point, Senator Hicks, welcome, and I defer to you and give you the floor.
Well, thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you, Mr. Vice Chair. I'm so grateful to be here this afternoon. I am also grateful to those that are joining this afternoon for our interim study on cold cases in Oklahoma. Every year, Oklahoma law enforcement agencies carry hundreds of unsolved violent crime cases, leaving families waiting decades for justice. Nationwide, over 250,000 murders remain unsolved, and Oklahoma is not immune to this crisis. Each unsolved case represents a family living with unanswered questions, communities without closure, and a justice system that has room to do better. So today we're going to hear directly from families. We're going to learn about how the Attorney General's office is leveraging their federal grants to strengthen cold case investigations and victim services, and see the innovative work of the Oklahoma State Bureau of Investigation Cold Case Unit, including their forensic and outreach strategies that have helped solve some of our toughest cases. So I think I'm just speaking to you all, but today is an opportunity to turn insights into action and to identify policy changes, resource needs, and collaborative strategies that will ensure that no case is forgotten and no family is left behind. So with that, I would like to introduce our very first speaker. This is my constituent, Dorian Quillen, who will be speaking on behalf of two families. Dorian, if you'll join at the podium.
Does this do the slides? Okay. Here we go. Well, I'd like to thank again Senator Hicks. Thank you for your interest in this very important issue that affects so many Oklahoma families. Let me get back to my presentation here. Sorry, guys. I'm here representing the family of a very famous case in Oklahoma called the State Fair murders. It happened in 1987. It involved two sisters, Cheryl Ginzer and Lisa Pennington. They went to the Oklahoma State Fair. They were never seen again by their family. Their bodies were found about a month later in a shallow grave buried on top of each other, about a mile from the home of one of the men last seen with them. I'm here because the parents have passed away. Rocky and Charlotte, they fought as hard as they could for many, many years. And they outlived justice. They couldn't make it. And then one of the brothers, who is alive, he told me he's just too demoralized to be here. He's had his hopes brought up so many times over almost 4 decades that he said, I can't have hope and then just be crushed again. So he asked me to be here, and I'm just very honored to do that. I'll give you a brief overview. Well, that was the overview of the case. One suspect was arrested initially named Lane Henley. He was arrested because another man stepped forward and said that he had seen Lane Henley assault these girls. So Lane was arrested. There was a preliminary hearing. And during that hearing, that witness recanted his testimony. So Lane Henley was released, and no one else has ever been arrested for these crimes. There is another living suspect, and we'll get to him in a minute. My involvement, this is year 34 that I've known the Penningtons. I met them in, 1990. I was a reporter, and I was covering a support group for murder victims' families. And I told them at the time, if there's anything I can ever do for you guys, let me know. And I had no idea what I was saying. But I thought it would just be, maybe I'll write a letter to the editor on the anniversary every now and then. And here, 34 years later, I mean, I've worked with a number of people, private investigators. I got my PI license for a short time, and we've just done everything we can to try and move this case forward. So that's how I got involved. I will say that in 2021, the girl's mother, Charlotte, was on her deathbed. I went to see her, and I reiterated to her that promise that I made to them many years ago. I told her, as long as I'm alive, if there's anything that I think I can do, I will continue to work to move your girl's case toward a resolution, and I plan to keep that promise. This week in Texas, a very notable cold case, the yogurt shop murders, was solved after 34 years. That case prompted federal legislation in 2021 that's called the Homicide Victims' Rights, Families' Rights Act of 2021. It was signed by President Biden into law in 2022, and from there, the state of Georgia adopted that framework for some state legislation, and they've called it the Coleman-Baker Act of Georgia. It's named after two of their cold cases there. Tara Baker was a first-year law student at the University of Georgia. She was murdered in her apartment. And then Louise Baker, who was murdered in, I believe, 1990. What the main facet of the Coleman-Baker Act that we're trying to get here is that it establishes a review board through which cold case families, after a certain amount of time has passed, it gives them some options to request an entire case file review of their case. And if that results in some viable leads, it could also result in a completely new investigation, kind of from the ground up. So that's the basic framework of that. It's interesting that in 2023, when Georgia adopted the Coleman-Baker Act, the next year, which was last year, the Baker case was solved. They made an arrest after many decades. And in this slide, the law enforcement agencies were kind of lauding this piece of legislation. And then this is a quote I found from, I believe, the director of the Georgia Bureau of Investigation when they asked him, well, how did you guys solve that? And you can see his comment there is kind of, basically, they reviewed everything. And I would refer to, I have a handout, the Coleman-Baker Act, and I would like to look at, when he says we reviewed everything, 3 elements of that act that I believe, if applied to the State Fair case, and possibly some of the more than 1,000 other cold cases in Oklahoma, might still, even almost 4 decades in, bring some maybe resolution or at least some progress. The first thing is that I think is relevant is it would be an assessment of whether witnesses can be re-interviewed, should be re-interviewed, or if there are any new witnesses to interview. Now, in this case, that's relevant because over the years, all the different people working on the State Fair case generated a list of, I think it was over 30 people who independently of one another came forward over time to state that the second suspect, who is still alive, had bragged or confessed to them. The second suspect also, in the preliminary hearing testimony at Lane Henley's hearing, perjured himself about his whereabouts on the night in question. So we believe that while some of those witnesses are dead, certainly it's been a long time, a re-interview of whoever's left on that list, and some of them are still willing to talk, It's a very well-known case over in Britain, part of Oklahoma City. We believe that could possibly lead to some very significant information that could possibly move this case forward. The second thing, when he says we investigated everything, and this is an element of the Coleman-Baker Act, an examination of physical evidence to see if all appropriate forensic testing and analysis was performed in the first instance, or if additional testing might produce information relevant to the investigation. Now, this is a statement from the Coleman case in Georgia. 30 years, a crucial piece of evidence sat unprocessed in the evidence room. And then it goes on to say, you know, if they had had this law, a family could have requested a review and examination of the physical evidence years earlier. Now, in our case, there's a lot of relevance to this. Physical evidence. I will preface it by saying this case occurred in the heyday of disgraced Oklahoma City forensic chemist Joyce Gilchrist, which was a national scandal. She testified at the preliminary hearing for Lane Henley. And I think whether this law is enacted or not, just the fact that this case was smack dab in the middle of that era is grounds to have the physical evidence inventoried, evaluated, and re-examined. That's just my personal feeling on that. Over the years, the Pennington family has been told an ever-changing array of stories about the physical evidence in their case. They were told years ago, there's not any. Well, this is from the preliminary hearing testimony of Joyce Gilchrist, and you can see there is certainly physical evidence. And for both girls, there's an array of evidence. There's fingernails, there's hair, clothing, jewelry. In addition to that, there's ballistic information, and there's some suggestion if you review the case file, that there were two shooters. Two different types of bullets were found near the burial site where these girls were found. So there is, two sets of evidence. There's DNA potentially through any of these items that I don't think have ever been tested because no one ever went to trial. And then a ballistics evidence is available. And I know in the yogurt shop case, they just said last week that two of the elements that helped them solve that was they found the killer's DNA under the fingernails of one of the 4 victims there. They kept resubmitting it to the database, which I guess continues to get new information all the time. Additionally, they submitted the bullets, and they got a hit in the ballistics database as well. So I think that has a direct relevance to this evidence. The family has never had an accounting of this. They've been told, oh, it's been ruined. No, we have it. No, there's not any. No, we can't talk about it. This is public record. Anybody could go look up this transcript and find, obviously, some physical evidence. And I think the family deserves to know. They're not naive. They lived through the Joyce Gilchrist era. That was when this happened. They're not naive, but they deserve to know, does this evidence exist? What condition is it in? Is any part of it viable for any of the most recent forensic testing available? So we think this is a very credible point of this law that would help because families could request that. Interestingly, in our case, there's a secondary set of information because Lane Henley left Oklahoma after he was released. And remarkably, he went to New Mexico. In New Mexico, suddenly, a girlfriend associated with him ended up shot in the head, buried in a shallow grave by a pond, just like these girls. Now, he was never arrested in New Mexico, but he was always the primary suspect. He passed away, by the way, in 2015. So I don't know if any of the DNA from that case, the ballistics from that case, has ever been cross-referenced with information here in Oklahoma City, but that's 2 sets of potential evidence that could be, we think, either evaluated, possibly tested, but certainly submitted, hopefully some of it, into some of these databases. So that gives the family a lot of hope. The third element that I think of this act, which I'd really like it, if we could get it through, man, I'd love to call it the Pennington-Ginzer Victims' Rights Act of Oklahoma. This family's been through so much, and this third part speaks to that. The third part in the Coleman-Baker Act says if a reinvestigation happens, it shall not be solely conducted by a person who previously investigated the homicide at issue. Now, why is that important for our case? Well, several important reasons. This is a list of statements that the Penningtons were told, these are from pretty early in the case, like the first 10 years, by pretty much all the agencies that are supposed to be helping them. I mean, this is bad. We have better things to do than look for your daughters. That's how it kicked off. We know who killed your girls, but there's nothing we can do. Wait 15 years and someone will confess. Your case has been screwed up from the beginning. Now, if you or I were a criminal defendant in, say, a capital murder case, and our attorney said any version of this, I'm not a lawyer, but I think you'd have the option to make some changes. You might be able to file ineffective assistance of counsel and get your case thrown out, or if you'd already been convicted, possibly walk free, but at a minimum, get fresh eyes to look at your case to represent you. Why do criminal defendants have that option, and these families don't have that? If this is how they're treated, they're supposed to just take it on the chin and go, well, maybe someday someone will come along to help us. We think that's unacceptable. And this act, this bill, would put that power back in the hands of these families who deserve it. It would give them simply some options that they do not have, and certainly that the Pennington family has not had. I tried to find statistics. Y'all probably in this room know this better than me, but I found, as far as Oklahoma's unsolved cases, it's certainly not just the Pennington case. The lowest number I found was approximately 1,000, and then I looked at another stat here, and it was up to, I think, 2,300. That's like Senator Hicks, that's a lot of people. That's a lot of empty seats at the holidays. That's a lot of people missing weddings and births and all the things that make up our lives. So it's a lot of folks. I'll close with this front page that we got. This was from 3 years ago on the 35th anniversary of these murders, and I like the headline, "It's been hell." I'll tell you what, to get a case this cold, 35 years at that time, on the front page of a major newspaper, it takes a lot of people over a long period of time doing things that seem at the time impossible. But collectively, we got it back out there. And the headline really grabbed me because I thought about my time with the Penningtons, and I've known them for over 30 years, and they became really good friends of mine. And I think of what I saw them go through, and I listened to them, and I saw the impact on them. And I think the parents both died prematurely from the stress of this case. I think it's highly possible. They fought as hard as they could, but man, I remember Rocky and Charlotte both saying to me after the murders, they said we'd wake up in the middle of the night, and we would see our girls at the end of our bed begging us for help, begging us, please help us. When I multiplied that by 1,000 other families, it gets really hard for me to breathe talking about this. That's just a lot of people. We're not a small group. That's a lot of people. And I will close with what I listened to one of the yogurt shop family members say this week when they saw that. She said, you know, it's time to open up the cold case boxes. Don't let them keep your case in a box on a shelf somewhere. It's time to open them up. It's time to enter the data into databases that are available, and with the technology that we have today, more of these cases should be being solved, and I absolutely agree with that. Again, we have the support of many, many unsolved case families in Oklahoma, and I believe we'd have a lot more once they find out about this. In addition, Lorinda Morgan is here from the Cheyenne-Arapaho tribe. The girls were Cheyenne-Arapaho, and the tribe supports this effort as well. So we have, I think we're in the majority. We have a lot of support for this. It's not just, I'm up here going some Yahoo thing, you know. One more thing I will say that I left out in terms of the case being taken out of the hands of the original investigators. Look, I don't have anything against them. I know that in 2000, we got America's Most Wanted to come here, which takes an act of God. But they came here, and they spent a 45-minute segment on the show, and they told us this was the first time in their history of that show that the local jurisdiction refused to cooperate. They didn't return their call. And America's Most Wanted didn't just send some crazy person. They sent a retired New York City homicide detective with over 30 years of experience. And he came here and investigated the case on their behalf. And Oklahoma City wouldn't even return his call. I think the territorialism that is maybe human nature over time, I think that's a recipe to keep cold cases cold. If you want to keep cold cases unsolved, say those things that I just had up there to families and act like that. I think we can do better. These families deserve better. This family deserves better, and I hope we can get it done. Thank you so much for your attention. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Dorian. I really appreciate all of your persistence. And we spoke earlier this spring, and she brought me a copy of that front page of the paper. And once you read through the details, I feel like it's something that you can't unsee. And so I'm just grateful that you brought it to my attention and allowed us to have some time to discuss that today. Next, we're going to hear from the Attorney General's office. It's my pleasure to introduce Jimmy Harmon. This next portion of our presentation is pretty staggering. So if there are individuals who are survivors or family members of individuals who have been involved in this kind of case, you're welcome to step outside during this time. So, Jimmy.
Thank you, Senator Hicks, Chairman Weaver, other members of the Senate Public Safety Committee. I appreciate your invitation to be here. I think Dorian gives us a prime example of why these cases are important, why our work on these cases is important, and why we do the things we do. I want to talk to you about I'll tell you a little bit about myself, so for context purposes, not that I'm important, but I've been in ADA since 1998. Intern in Muskogee County, I was in Jackson County, Pittsburgh County, worked for Drew Edmondson for a little while, but when I came to Oklahoma County DA's office in 2006, I was assigned to a special victims unit docket, much to my chagrin. Those are considered the messy cases, the nasty cases, the cases other people don't want to touch. I asked for a drug docket. They said, no, Jimmy, you're doing a SVU docket. And, you know, I ended up kind of finding my purpose in that. And there were a lot of cases. The first cold case I remember working on, it was filed against the DNA profile because they didn't know who it was, but they wanted to preserve the statute of limitations. Fortunately, she didn't die. She was an 8-year-old girl that was abducted on her way home. Her and her brother had walked to one of his friend's house while parents were gone. Parents said, whatever you do, don't leave the house. Guess what they did? They left the house. They were playing with Pokemon cards. There was an argument. The little girl walked home. Kenneth Johnston talked her into his car. He kidnapped her. He raped her. He sodomized her over the next 12 hours or so in a secluded area that we really still don't know where it was. Fortunately, he didn't kill her. He dropped her off close enough to home where she walked and she saw the police cars outside her house, so she thought she was in trouble. And she climbed in her window, and a policeman saw her, and they took her to the hospital. The police didn't actually believe her. Her story was so fantastic that they thought that she had made it up and was covering to not get in trouble. But the same nurse did. They took a rape exam and got a DNA profile, and several years later that was filed against the DNA profile to preserve the statute of limitations, because there is a statute of limitations on rape, and it was a lot less back then. When I got the case, this girl was no longer 8 years old, she was 18 years old. And they had matched up the DNA, and Kenneth Johnston was the perpetrator, and he had been to prison for DUI, and that's what got the hit, but never any sex crimes. I still remember to this day doing the preliminary hearing. I wasn't going to ask her to identify Kenneth Johnston because I had the DNA. I didn't need her to identify him in person like you normally would. And frankly, I didn't think she'd be able to. I mean, that was when she was 8 years old. She's 18 or 19 now. But she kept looking over at him. And about the third time, I was like, do you recognize the man that did this to you in the courtroom? And she said yes, and she pointed him out. The other one fascinating thing about that case was that she did they had a police artist, Harvey Pratt. Some of you may know Harvey. He was retired. He was interim director of OSBI at some point. Good friends with our former chief agent, Jack Davis. Great guy, and he did a sketch based upon the little girl's description. And you could hold up that sketch and this guy, Kenneth Johnston's DOC photo. I couldn't have drawn him that good if I'd been staring at him. One of the TV stations put it on the air. Unfortunately, a lot of the cold cases I had after that didn't have live victims. Kenneth Johnston got 580 years, by the way, and I checked this morning, and he's still in Lawton Correctional Facility, or Red Rock, or whatever they call it now. So a lot of the cases I worked on then after that were murders, unfortunately. Kathy Sue Engel in 1986 ended up. I didn't know it. I went to law school with her son. We're the same age. Didn't know his mother had been murdered when he was 13, when we were 13. She was abducted from Shepherd Mall parking lot, back when Shepherd Mall was a mall. Her car was found at a truck stop about 28 hours later in Tucumcari, Carri, New Mexico. Her body was found 7 days later off of Cemetery Road in Sarah, Oklahoma, close to the Oklahoma-Texas border, naked with her hands bound behind her back. Kyle Eckert was identified through DNA years later. He was never on the radar. Police thought they knew who did it because they had other mall abductions during that time period, and so they assumed they knew who did it, but it wasn't. It was Kyle Eckert and another man who was deceased by the time the DNA hit came back. Her son Dawson, by this time, was a special judge in Pottawatomie County, and that was a death case, but he ended up pleading guilty to life without parole with the family's blessing. Through the years, there were a lot more. Most recently in 2021, Ryan Stevenson, some of you may know, he works for the District Attorney's Council now, and I tried a case where there was a serial killer and he killed 4 young women, girls and young women, ranging from 12 years old to 20 years old, in 1997, after he had been released from prison for abducting and sexually assaulting a college freshman from OU. She'd pulled over the side of the road, her car was flooded out. He was a truck driver, he offered to give her a ride. She got in, he started sexually abusing her, wouldn't let her go. He does about 10 years in prison, gets out, and goes on a killing spree from Houston to here in 1997. He kills a little girl, 12 years old. She was a ballerina. She was jogging down from her house. He picked her up, got her in his truck some way. We think, based on reports he said to other inmates, that he told her dad had had a medical event or heart attack and he needed to take her to the home or to the hospital. Her body was found naked, just wearing her socks in a retention pond about a week later. The girl from Oklahoma in Bethany was abducted from a car wash. And then a girl in Denton that was a student, a freshman at the University of North Texas, I think it is, and another girl who was 17 outside of Galveston, Texas as well. So fortunately, he abducted one young woman who jumped out of his truck going 70 miles an hour down an interstate outside of Houston and got away and identified him, got him locked up before he could kill any more young women. Those are some of the cases that have come through the Oklahoma County DA's office in the last 15 years that I've touched, I guess had the opportunity in a weird way to be involved in those cases, and there's several more. The one I want to talk to you today, though, is about Kirsten Hatfield, because I think there are some specific lessons to be learned from Kirsten's case. Kirsten was 8 years old. She lived with her mom, Shannon Hazen, in Midwest City. Her mom was a young single mother, probably didn't have a lot of money, was renting a house there, was over at, she had been over to a friend's house earlier in the night, a neighbor, but she said she was at home that night, the mother. Kirsten was snatched out of her bedroom at night. And those are things that don't really happen just in the movies, right? Except it happened. And I'm not saying that to scare people, because realistically, statistically, those things don't happen, and there are much greater things to be worried about, usually offenders, sex offenders, or someone you know, somebody, a family member or a friend. So I don't say that to scare people, but the thing that doesn't happen happened to Kirsten Hatfield. And I'll show you. I know I had some photographs. I don't know if outside of the PowerPoint, I don't know if those got loaded up. Okay, maybe they didn't. Can you load those up first? Can you out? Yeah. You didn't get them? Okay. So I was going to show you in the photographs, because Kirsten's house was here in Midwest City. Anthony Palma's house was one house down, or 2 houses down. There was one house between them. And 20 years later, guess where he lived? The exact same spot. and I'm talking about this particular case. One, no other case probably touched me more than this one, but also because there are some lessons to be learned. This case should have been solved a long time before it was, and I'll tell you why. When 1998, there was no state labs or city labs doing DNA testing in Oklahoma. So they send it out, FBI gets involved, Midwest City Police Department is involved, working it conjointly. They send the DNA out to the FBI lab, in, I think it's in Quantico, and get some results there. And I'll get, maybe I'll save that till the end of it to tell you exactly how that case ended up getting solved and start going through the PowerPoint here. Okay, this is a timeline of Anthony Palma. Once we charged him, we kind of the detective, I should say, started looking back at his history. And some of these things were charged and some things weren't. See if I can see. Yeah, he did go to prison for this when he was in, I think he was in Lawton. He was renting a house, garage apartment behind the postmaster's house. And when the postmaster was out of town, Anthony Palma went into the house and got on top of the man's wife and tried to assault her. Luckily, she had a gun and pulled it and shot at him and scared him off. But he did go to prison for that, although it wasn't a sex crime because they couldn't prove the sexual nature of it. It never got to that point, although we all think of it. I think he was charged maybe with burglary and assault and battery, or some form of felony assault and battery that he did go to.
Mr. Harmon, if I could ask, would you stand behind the mic? And the reason is we can hear you in the room, but there's probably several people listening online. If you
Yes, sir.
don't mind.
Yes, sir, Mr. Chairman. So this one, I'm sorry, because it's hard to see here as to which one came up here. But this one actually in 1981, I got ahead of myself a little bit. In 1981, this was never reported to police. Kirsten, remember, was 8 years old. There was a girl named Deborah who Anthony Palma was dating her older sister, who was 16, 17 years old, and they shared a bedroom. Deborah and her sister shared a bedroom. Anthony Palma climbs in that window, and instead of going to his girlfriend, he goes to 8-year-old Deborah and sexually assaults her, basically. Deborah never told anyone until she got married, and her and her husband bought their first house together. And one of the first things Deborah did was she nailed all the windows shut. And her husband said, "Why are you nailing the windows shut?" And she told him. She started crying and told him what had happened to her when she was 8 years old. She never reported to police. Once Anthony Palma was charged in the murder of Kirsten Hatfield, she came forward and reported it to police then. And we don't know the exact date because she didn't report it, but it was sometime around 1981. This is the second one that, this is the one I talked to you about. Benita was the wife of the postmaster who he attacked and did go to prison for. Okay, I'm gonna have to walk out just to see it. Okay, May 14th of 1997 was when Kirsten Hatfield went missing. Sometime, I think, between 11:30 at night and 6:30 a.m. I think her mother went into her bedroom and noticed that she was gone out of the bedroom that day. And I had some pictures of her bedroom, but it was a small bedroom, small bed, and the window is cracked just a little bit that we believe she was taken out of. This was another girl who was living with Anthony Palma. His mother, Palma had befriended the girl's mother, and she had basically abandoned the girl to him. She was a late teen, and when she was about 18, she woke up naked in the bathtub. She couldn't remember anything that happened, but she thought something bad had happened to her, and went and got an exam. I don't think he was charged with that. I'm not sure if was reported at the time. Okay, so this gets us to, what does that say, 2015? Two detectives. One was Midwest City Detective Daryl Miller. One was an FBI agent named Nate Furr. decided to look back at this case and see what the evidence was. This had to be one of the most infamous crimes in Midwest city history, right? A little girl snatched out of her house. And here's another tragedy of this case, as if that wasn't enough, is that the police immediately and continually suspect that Kirsten's mother, Shannon, had something to do with this murder. Because strangers don't abduct children out of their bedrooms in the middle of the night, except in the movies, right? And so for over 15 years, Shannon lived under a cloud, basically, of being suspected of having something to do with the abduction and murder of her own child. So, I can only imagine what that's like as a mother to, one, lose your child, and then everyone thinks you're responsible for it. Either you or your family member or a friend of yours. Or maybe she just didn't want to be a mother anymore, I think was kind of what some people thought of that. And I just talked to Shannon this morning, by the way, to make sure she was okay with me talking about it. Luckily, she still had the same cell phone, and she's now gotten through school and is a therapist and has her own practice now. So I think she's doing well, but this topic is very near and dear to her, and she was not only okay, she was with us talking about it, but glad that this is coming to light. And this topic of investigating cold cases is very near and dear to her, as you might imagine. So these two detectives, Agent Furr and Detective Miller, decided to go back and look at this case. Not that this wasn't really necessarily their day job, especially for Detective Miller. I'm sure he had his own cases coming in through Midwest City every day that he needed to clear out. Because Midwest City didn't have a dedicated cold case unit like OCPD has. They start looking at this case, and they get the FBI lab report, and they send it out to the OSBI lab and say, hey, is there anything here you can test? And the analyst is like, yeah, I need this and this. I need the underwear and these blood scrapings from the window. And they get a DNA profile. But it's not in CODIS, right? It's not in CODIS. So, because when Anthony Palma had went to prison for this 1982 attack, that was way before DNA testing, right? There's not even, that's over a decade before, probably a couple of decades before they were swabbing people in DOC. So what do they do with this unknown profile? Well, they start kind of canvassing the neighborhood. They start looking through the old reports, find people that were mentioned, not really suspects. I don't think person of interest was really a term of art back then, but people whose name appeared. And Anthony Palma was a person whose name appeared in the reports because he was a neighbor. And one girl in the neighborhood that said he looked creepy at her, or he looked at her creepily, I guess. But that was kind of all they had. Nothing really linking Anthony Palma. He was nowhere near the top of their suspect list, wouldn't even necessarily call him a suspect. But they knock on his door and they say, hey, Mr. Palma, we're just investigating this whole case. We're trying to rule people out. Can we get a DNA swab from you? Sure, no problem. And it's like a little long Q-tip. They just swab the inside of their mouth. There's no blood draw or anything like that. It's real non-invasive. They take it, put it in an envelope, have a nice day, expect to never see him again, right? But they did. So the OSBI gets the DNA match, and since Kirsten was never found, still to this day her body has never been found, they didn't have a known DNA sample from Kirsten, so they had to get things like her toothbrush, worn underwear, that type of thing to try to establish what they call an alternate known. And I think if you'll see in these slides, it wasn't a perfect, there wasn't DNA at every loci or location, so it was a partial DNA profile. Unlike if you get a swab or blood, you're going to get a full profile. Sure. And so that's just when he was arrested and when he tried to kill himself in jail, which we got in evidence of that as like kind of a guilty mind theory. These were the underwear, and I wish I had a farther out photo, but this is the backyard of Kirsten's backyard, and this is the fence at the end of that backyard. Her underwear was found at the corner of that fence, just like that. Nobody's touched it at the time that photograph on your left is taken. And then the photograph on your right is after FBI had made the cuttings for DNA testing. And 1998 was fairly early, even for FBI to do DNA testing, and they were switching over from, I think, RLFP to PCR testing at that point. So you see the big cuts are for the RLFP, and the PCR, which is basically like, it makes copies so they don't need as much DNA. It works as like a copy machine, or we used to call it Xerox machine, to amplify the amount of DNA you had. So the cuttings for the PCR method are much smaller, but they went ahead and did both because the lab was transitioning at that point. So this is my closing PowerPoint from the trial. I didn't really change anything in it. And the big thing was obviously DNA. So we needed to be able to talk to the jury about what DNA is, what it really means. You've heard about it on TV, but it's a little more complicated than that. And the jury had heard from an OSBI analyst. They'd heard from an FBI analyst who was now the FBI's chief DNA scientist, but oddly they have 5 of those before you think it's the biggest thing. And it can be kind of confusing. Every spec of material like this had an FBI number, it had an OSBI number. Sometimes some of these items have exhibit numbers now. And so in closing argument, I'm trying to branch all these things together, or morph all these things together so the jury understands. And they've just heard verbally what the statistics are too. And so I want them to see that, because I think a lot of people like myself are visual. So in this slide here, we're seeing a piece of her underwear, and where there's a mixture, the analyst will try to, and I'm a lawyer, not a scientist, so take everything I say on this with a grain of salt, but they will try to separate out the major component and the minor component, and they can do that sometimes chemically to do that. And you will see here that the major component of the DNA profile matched Anthony Palma. I think that's the 80, and the chances of selecting a random unrelated individual from the population is 1 in 83.3 sextillion. We can see that the minor component was of Kirsten's DNA, but only to a probability of 1 in 11,000. And so that usually just means that there's not much of her DNA present. So her DNA is only at a few of the loci or locations they test. But having their mixture on a piece of her underwear was obviously, huge. It was our case, right? This was another cutting. And so this says matches, and I brought my low-tech pointer here. That's significant. You rarely see where they say it's a match. It's usually cannot be excluded. It has to match at every loci. And back in the day, they used to sample maybe 7 or 11 loci. Now it's probably, I don't know, I'm sure OSBI will be able to tell us. It's probably like 20 or 30 different loci or more now. And for it to be a match, there has to be a match at every loci. If there's just no DNA at that particular location, then they won't call it a match. And our numbers, I think, on that are 1 in 293 sextillion. And that's pretty rare to get. Usually only get that on blood, although it can be other bodily fluids. Again, take everything I say on the science front with a grain of salt. But this was another cutting that was consistent with his profile. Again, I'm trying to match up to the jury the different numbers, the different item numbers, and what the statistical analysis is telling us between the major, and minor components. And there were quite a few different cuttings, partially because they did both the RLFP, I think I've got those letters right, and the PCR. And this is where they're trying to separate into the epithelial and sperm fractions, and OSBI can tell you what that really means, but they're trying to separate out the victim's DNA from the perpetrator's DNA, but it's not always successful, because here you see that Kirsten's was in the sperm fraction. Obviously, she's a little girl, she doesn't have sperm, but that's something that you got to explain to jurors why that is. That just means that's the part of the sample that they tried to separate out. It doesn't mean that separation actually worked or was perfect. This is the other big item of evidence we had. These are scrapings, and you can barely see them up here. You can see the razor blade well, and you see the FBI initials, but there was some blood, drops of dried blood on her windowsill. And I think I got a picture of the window here in a minute that also matched to Anthony Palma. So he must have cut himself at somehow getting in this window and left blood, thankfully. And there's the different OSBI and FBI numbers and our FLP cutting. And so that was a sole source, which is, kind of your best thing, because you don't have a mixture with two or more people. And that was another, I think they put them in two different envelopes, and that was a slightly different statistical analysis. This was, Kirsten was abducted and killed, I think, May 14th of 1997, so close after Mother's Day. And the defense was trying to say, well, maybe she just ran away, maybe she's still alive, maybe she joined the circus, maybe she's, out somewhere, and she's not really dead, so you can't convict our defendant of murder. So we had these things that she had filled out just within the last, that month, about how she felt about her mother, and you can see about her talking about her mother and how much she loved her in these different documents. And that was Kirsten. That was her last school picture that was taken. And I talk about this case not because it was such a significant case to me personally, but also because of how this case was solved, and I kind of foreshadowed that earlier. The FBI's chief DNA scientist, I learned as I'm preparing for trial, had told the FBI agent, the wrong information. Not on purpose, but mistakenly. And so 15 plus years, FBI agents and Midwest City Police, they don't realize they've got an unknown male profile on her underwear or on the blood scrapings on the window. I had seen it in the FBI agent's report, and I thought the agent got it wrong. I just assumed the agent must have got it wrong, right? Not the scientist. Well, it was the scientist this time. And when I'm talking to the FBI scientist on the phone with him in D.C. and me in Oklahoma City, he's reading to me from his notes from back in 1998 when the testing was done. And he starts reading. He's like, I told the agent that it was the uncle's DNA. The uncle was in rehab at the time, so he was excluded. We knew that he couldn't have been the killer. He had an alibi. And I said, well, wait a minute, time out, you're giving me a heart attack. That's not right, is it? And so he goes back through his notes and says, oh yeah, I told him wrong. And so for almost 17 years, this case went unsolved with the killer living 2 houses down, and the mother lived with this shadow over her for all of those years of not only losing a child, but being the prime suspect in her child's murder. And it's because those two detectives, Detective Miller and Agent Furr, going and doing something they didn't have to do, that wasn't part of their regular assignment or docket of cases to investigate, and unearthing these cases. And frankly, that's how a lot of these cases get solved, just determination and more than a little bit of luck. And that's why it's important, I think, I'm trying to tie this in, is to the work that OSBI is doing and the work that the AG's office is trying to start doing, to have dedicated officers, agents, police to investigate these cases, because 80% of the work is on the law enforcement side, and maybe that may be underselling it. As prosecutors, unless they bring us a case, we don't have anything to prosecute. So it's on them. And all the cases that I've worked on, I've had the benefit of having some outstanding detectives and officers working those cases who went back and did all the stupid things I asked them to do without asking why. And so 80% of it's them. I will say there is a component to prosecutors. I think, I'm not trying to make a plug for funding here, but when DAs and AGs and other want to ask you for money to recruit and retain talent, this is why you need it. Because you don't want to give a case like this to somebody just out of law school that doesn't know the difference between an allele and a loci, right? Because how do you explain it to a jury if you don't understand it somewhat yourself? And thanks to the analysts at OSBI and OCPD and the other labs, they do a great job of teaching us and teaching the jurors as well. So we have. I think Senator Hicks made reference earlier, applied for when I came over from Oklahoma County DA's office at the end of 2022, beginning of 2023, working for elected officials. As you know, sometimes you have to switch jobs after elections. And I came to the AG's office and Attorney General Drummond brought me over and several other prosecutors from that office who had experience doing cold cases. And I said, well, it would be a waste if our experience was lost. So there was a cold case grant that the feds were giving out, and not a lot of money, $500,000 over 3 years, as you all know, doesn't go very far when you're hiring people, but we decided to pour that into agents and analysts. So far we've got one dedicated plus a supervisor doing cold cases, and we're advertising for a second. So people that can just focus on that and not have other job responsibilities, and we'll probably get an analyst at some point too when the work requires that. And OSBI was really helpful to us in applying for that grant with providing statistics and support to do that. And so I'm excited for us to be able to work with them, with Director Mashburn. As I told the group the other day, with the MMIP group, there's not a finer prosecutor in the state of Oklahoma than Greg Mashburn. And their OSBI has some excellent agents and analysts, chemists, but having him at the head of that, I think, is a real blessing as well to all of us in the law enforcement community. I think that's about all I wanted to say. As I understand it, questions will be at the end. I appreciate your time.
Thank you so much, Jimmy. I really appreciate your willingness to come, and I know that this is kind of at the outset of how those federal funds are going to be building out their framework. And so when I spoke with the AG's office, they were like, well, we don't have any results yet because we're just getting the framework in place because we just received the funding. But I'm really, really thankful that you put together a thoughtful presentation that explains why your expertise is so needed at the Attorney General's office. So thank you very much. Next, we're going to hear from OSBI. It's my pleasure to introduce Special Agent Francia Thompson.
Hello, thank you for being here today. I wanted to say thank you, first of all, for having us out and having the opportunity to give you an insight into what the OSBI does at the Bureau. Like Senator Hicks mentioned, my name is Francia Thompson, and I work in the cold case unit at the OSBI. As you can see from the slide, this is our unit. It's small, but I like it small and mighty because we have a lot of great help all the time. We have a lieutenant, we have a criminal intel analyst in our unit, and then there are 3 of us special agents working under that unit. Our mission is to speak for those who cannot speak for themselves. And we want to seek answers and justice for not only the victims, but also their families. And this is something that we do on a daily basis when we go to work and work these cases. Currently, the cold case unit at the OSBI was started in November 1st of 2018. So it doesn't seem like that long ago. But when it was started because our administration at the time knew that we needed to put some funding some effort into solving our cold cases. Currently, the OSBI has 445 cases alone. This is the cases that we have worked from the get-go, that we have been requested to work, and also the cases that along the way, agencies that request us give to us. So they can request us a month later, 2 months later, 10 years later, and we help them with these cases by taking them on. Every case at the Bureau is currently assigned to a current OSBI agent. So all these cases get reviewed once a year by a supervisor, giving information on what needs to be done, following what we need to do. Some of the duties that our agents have is we interview suspects and witnesses. We help to locate evidence, we establish chain of custody for that evidence, and we coordinate with prosecutors to solve these cases. Our analysts, some of their job duties are to assemble case information. This includes getting lab reports, old investigative reports. They complete a workup on current parties involved, whether they are deceased or still living. And our criminalists play a big part in our team as well. They conduct analysis on evidence. They coordinate with other labs when we need to send stuff off when we don't have the capability to do that. And they assist with the evaluation of cases to see what their solvability rate is. At the Bureau, we've had some success over the years since 2018. And it's really hard for me to see in the back, so I'm going to try to remember this from memory. But we start off by looking at a case during a cold case briefing, and I'll talk a little bit more about that in my presentation. It's all right. During these cold case briefings, I think this will be okay, we get together with our investigative team and our criminalist team, and we look at all the case, the reports, photos, and then we decide what the case solvability is. At the time that that's done, we prioritize that. Evidence gets submitted to our laboratory, we get it analyzed. At the same time, agents are working on interviewing, looking for witnesses, hoping that in some way we meet together when we find a suspect or somebody of interest and be able to do and collect the information that we need to take our case to the prosecutors who can prosecute a case. We also get a lot of tips and requests for information. When we get those, our investigative team goes through all those calls and emails, and we make sure that we locate information. Is it our case? What is on this case? What did OSBI do? If it's not a case that we worked, that information gets sent to that law enforcement agency, and we offer our services at that time. If it is a case that we worked and we need to look at it, we can determine if at that time if it needs to have a cold case briefing. And then the process starts all over again. We have had some success doing this process. Obviously, when we started, it wasn't like that. We had to learn slowly to get to that stage. But we have had a lot of things, and our keys to our success is that we have dedicated personnel and resources. We are able to immerse ourselves in these cases, and we are able to work them nonstop. Like Mr. Harmon said, having people dedicated to only doing that job and not having to be stepping away from that to work current cases makes a difference, and that's what we do on our team. We are able to have actionable leads from our criminalists. When evidence gets submitted, we can get names from fingerprints, we can get DNA information, we can get firearms information. All that gives us actionable leads. We have an excellent communication within our team with our criminalists and investigative personnel. Because we meet so often, we talk about cases, we are all there for the same reason. We want to solve cases. We really have a really great communication. We also have the support of our command staff. Since the cold case unit started, the support has been there. They know our mission, they know what we need to do. Everybody knows that it's expensive to travel out of state, be gone for weeks, go looking for people, interviewing, arresting, bringing back suspects. All that takes time and money. If you do not have support or command staff that is supportive, it's really hard to do your job. But our command staff really supports our mission, and they really encourage us to keep doing our job. We also have previous reviews of cases that have been done where evidence has already been located, so it makes it easier to get it started in the process. And we participate in the FBI's Violent Criminal Apprehension Program. However, we do have challenges, like anybody else. We deal with lost or degraded evidence, chain of custody that goes along with that. We run into witnesses, especially after a long time, witnesses that have memory issues, dementia issues. We have suspects and witnesses that are deceased. We always have, not always, but sometimes we have jurisdiction issues, and then sometimes we run into statute of limitations when it comes to non-homicides. Because we do work violent crimes, this could be sexual assaults that run out of statute of limitations. So what we do at the Bureau to solve these cases, and this is one thing that we started doing fairly early on, and it's helped to be really helpful for us. We have a cold case briefing once a month. And not only for us, the OSBI, our investigators, we invite agencies from other areas to come and present. If they have a cold case that they want to review, they want to bring it to our experts, they can do that. We welcome them to do that. During our monthly cold case briefings, we have investigators from our cold case unit, we have criminalists, we have our intel analyst, we have our supervisors, we have the medical examiner's office. We have a big team that comes out to review all these cases. We look at notes, we look at all the file, photos, and throw around ideas of what we need to do. To date, we have briefed 57 cold cases. So, and sometimes with these agencies, if they can't come and brief with them, we will go to them and brief them one-on-one with our team. Recently, I went to an agency that had to cancel their briefing last minute, and we were able to zoom in our briefing between us and our laboratory personnel at the lab. And when that was done, I was able to collect the evidence, bring it back to the OSBI lab, and submit it for them. So we were able to work on this case and help them out a little bit without them having to leave their jurisdiction. One of the big things that we cover in our cold case briefing is the evidence examination. We know that this is going to be the important part, especially with older cases. So we discuss these cases with our criminalists who are able to determine if evidence can be examined or re-examined with our current techniques and current advancements in technology. So new technology for firearms, DNA, latent prints, and trace have come a long way, even within the past couple of years. So all that information is helpful when we review the case with our criminalists side by side. We often do this for our agents, but we also do this for other agencies because we want them to know that the resource is there for them. But we want to help them identify cold cases to present to us. We do case evaluations and staffing with them. We will work side by side with them. I know that it was mentioned earlier that law enforcement is very protective of their cases and they don't want to let go of them sometimes, but I completely agree that we need to have a new set of eyes on things. It really opens up your mind to what's available. So when we do that, we work with them, give them new insight into the case, give them resources, and we are able to let them still work their case, but help them along the way. We help by locating and submitting evidence. We locate and decipher OSBI reports. Sometimes all the reports, including laboratory reports, are really hard to decipher, so we help them do that, or we put them in contact with our laboratory personnel that's able to tell them answers on what certain things mean. And we provide investigative and forensic resources that are needed to them. So some of the forensic resources that we've used, obviously when we talked about DNA and what it takes. A long time ago, well, not that long ago, we used to have a big sample of blood that was needed for our laboratory to get a DNA profile. Now you need just a little speck that you see on the other side of that button to be able to get decent DNA. So we got to keep in mind the techniques and the advances in technology that happen all the time. One of the biggest things that have happened is the forensic genetic genealogy. So in 2018, California was able to arrest the Golden State Killer using forensic genetic genealogy. In 2019, we started using forensic genetic genealogy in our laboratory. Obviously, it's used for unsolved violent crime cases and unidentified remains. We do have some drawbacks, obviously. It's expensive. Like anything else that's new, that takes a lot of time, it's very expensive, it's time consuming. The legwork to narrow down a family tree is is a lot. We have one of our in-house experts here that knows what it takes to build these family trees. And we also have to follow rules that are set forth by the feds. That means that we have to have a profile that's entered into CODIS, and enough evidence has to be remaining for it to be tested for genealogy. At the OSBI, like I mentioned, we have our own team that works with forensic genetic genealogy, so we're very fortunate that we're able to provide that service not only for our agency, but also for other agencies and the victims of Oklahoma. These are the cases that we have worked and identified with forensic genetic genealogy. And as I look at this list, I know I've missed a couple because we're constantly working to do more things. But we've been able to identify rapists, unidentified bodies. So we have a lot, and we're working on identifying homicide suspects. So the forensic genetic genealogy is a very important tool that we use that we're able to provide for our victims. Another thing that we do in the cold case unit is work missing and unidentified persons. We do not have a missing persons unit, so any missing and unidentified persons case comes directly to our cold case unit. In 2019, legislation in Oklahoma passed Francine's Law, telling us that we have to enter missing persons in Oklahoma within 30 days into the NamUs system, okay? And then we also have to provide or get all the biometric data that we can, do fingerprints, and provide other information to put into the system as well, and we are mandated to do yearly training. NamUs is a system that houses unidentified victims, missing persons, and unclaimed persons. The data that we can put into this database is family reference samples for DNA, fingerprints, military records, dental records, medical records, and investigative information. The amazing thing about this database is that both law enforcement and the public can look at it. Everybody has access to it, so to me it's one of the most amazing databases because everybody has access to it. The law enforcement side is more secure because we can't let everybody have your biometric data, but the public can see when that person went missing, what their information is, how tall they were, and they can make comparisons to other cases, not only in Oklahoma, but across the country. Just this past year, we received a $1 million grant to work missing and unidentified persons cases. And the $1 million grant extends for the next 3 years. It allows us to get more training, to do more DNA testing, which is expensive, work on forensic genetic genealogy testing. It allows us to basically do all the lab work that pretty much costs a lot of money. So this grant is going to be really good for us to work on missing and unidentified human remains. One of the programs that we do have is the cold case playing cards. I know a lot of people always call and ask about this program. The last time we did it, the last deck was our second deck. Now, after COVID hit, we ran into some issues where the card company we had closed, and the cost of these cards went almost over doubled what they were costing. So it made it very difficult for us to order another deck. Hopefully, with more funding, we'll be able to get that program back. But in lieu of the cold case playing cards, our analysts and people at the OSBI have worked really hard on getting our victims out there. If you go to our website, there's a cold case section where you can pull up victims in Oklahoma. And we have that. If we become aware of a victim, we put them on there. Obviously, we might miss some here and there, but if we become aware of them, we put them up there, and so everybody has a chance to know who our victims are and a synopsis of their case. So I've given you a little bit of information about how our unit works at the OSBI. Since 2018, we have resolved 98 cases. We have also given the name back to 12 victims. And we currently work and have numerous leads that have been generated with forensic genetic genealogy that give us the investigative lead we need to identify somebody that's been unidentified, or to be able to name them as a suspect and continue working on a case. And that is all from me, and I will be available for any questions.
Thank you. I think at this time we open for question. Senator Hicks, are there any questions of the members? Sorry, Senator Goodwin, you're recognized.
Thank you. I was wondering, how are the, I think it says about 1,000 people, right, that are cold cases that are trying to be solved, and I think about 98 were done, so that's about a 10%, about 10% are being solved. That's my first question. This girl right here.
Sorry, thank you for the question, but can you repeat that, please?
Yeah. Could you tell me that when, I think you said 98 cases have been solved, and there were
Yes, ma'am.
Approximately out of 1,000 that...
The OSBI currently has 445 cases that we have in our agency. So we have 98 that we have resolved up to this point since we started in 2018.
Okay.
Senator Goodwin, if you want to, just go ahead and continue to ask your question.
Thank you. And also, I'd like to know, would you know the demographics of those cold cases in terms of race, ethnicity, approximately what you're working with?
So we keep demographics of those victims. We always put them in our system. We can get that information to you if you would like. However, we don't focus on the demographics. We just work on all our victims. Are all important to us. So we want to make sure that whatever case we work on, we give the best that we can to that case, no matter what their demographic is.
Also, in terms of technology, I was looking at the blood sample, that it's gotten really minute, that it's such a small sample now that's needed. What are you all seeing on the horizon in terms of technology? Are you hearing about some really amazing breakthroughs that might be happening?
Hi, I'm Leslie Perry. I work in the lab. I know that the next big thing for DNA is we're going to be shifting from SDR analysis to sequencing, which is going to give us a lot more information. There is the potential for having some phenotype results from sequencing that would give us traits of the people that are involved. Genetic genealogy is the big thing right now that's being exploited for these cold cases. And a lot of what that's going to be capable of doing is going to depend on the oversight that's coming down the pike that we haven't had yet because it's so brand new.
Thank you. That's it.
Okay, no more questions. Any questions, Senator Hamilton? Okay, thank you. Senator Hicks, would you like to close?
Yes, Mr. Chair, thank you so much. I really want to thank everyone who shared their time and their expertise. I know I asked a lot of the folks who participated in our study today, and so thank you so much to the families and the advocates and also the law enforcement partners alike. Oklahoma currently has somewhere around 1,000 cold cases still unresolved, and every day prolongs the pain for victims' families. So today, we've seen that with the right tools, funding, dedicated cold case units, innovative forensic methods, and community engagement, we can make measurable progress. So I feel like now is the time for this committee to act, that we must consider legislative support, increased funding, and expanded collaborative efforts to ensure that victims receive justice, that families receive closure, and Oklahoma becomes a model for solving cold cases efficiently and effectively. So let's commit to making sure that every case counts and that every family knows that justice matters. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Very well said, Senator Hicks. Thank you for bringing a voice to people that can't be heard right now. And I know last year I carried a bill that had to do with missing indigenous people, and very proud of those bills and to try to do something about it. I just want to say thank you to the presenters today. Thank you, Senator Hicks, for bringing this. Also, just for the last 2 days, thankful for the members that were here yesterday and today. We appreciate all the hard work. And then to the staff, I know, thank y'all. And y'all put it together very nicely and well prepared. So seeing no other order of business, we are now adjourned.